All right, welcome back to another episode of Talk Lex. Scott Peterson, join us here. Lots to talk about in the world of high-profile celebrity lawsuits, which seems to be the topics of the day. Let's get right into it. I guess we're going to touch base first, touch back on the Justin Baldoni, Blake Lively case, because that is all over the headlines. It is just, the hole is just getting deeper and deeper. So a couple of things we wanted to talk about. First off, what's going on with what's commonly known as a gag order, and what's happening there?
So Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively requested a gag order in the federal cases that they have pending. So at this point, their lawsuit and then Justin Baldoni's lawsuit against them have been sort of consolidated, at least for now. So that, just to kind of streamline things. So they asked for a gag order, which basically would have prohibited Baldoni and his attorney from continuing with, just airing all of the dirty laundry of this situation and the lawsuit publicly. And in our last episode, it had not been decided yet, but I think we kind of predicted that it would probably be denied because the law really errs on the side of legal proceedings being public and people being able to speak about them. So not very surprisingly, that request for a gag order was denied. But I think the judge did, kind of caution them to cool it a little bit. But
Yeah, but it's like we said dozens of times, probably even on the podcast. I tell it to clients all the time. Once you file a lawsuit, you're an open book, and lawsuits are public inherently. You saw a lot of this going on with all the Trump lawsuits in the last couple of years. They tried to get gag orders. Some of them were actually put on in his case, but in this case, I'm not surprised at all to see that the court did not grant a gag order. And in conjunction with that, what Justin Baldoni put up a website which is not helping Blake Lively's cause, I suppose. Is that right? What do you think?
yeah, I went to the website. It's called thelawsuitinfo.com. I
Well, I'm surprised
I
nobody owned that domain already. That's interesting. Okay.
I know. So I find this kind of unhinged. I mean, and it just kind of goes back to like when you get yourself involved in something like this, you really can't predict what the other side is going to do. This seems like strange to me. That being said, like we've had 3 podcast episodes about this, and there's like 8 million other people talking about this on a daily basis, including, other celebrities. So obviously there's an interest in it. So, maybe it's not totally unhinged to have the website, but I did go to it. And right now, all it has is public legal documents. So, like anybody who has a Pacer account or something can, go and find this stuff themselves. Um, so the only thing that's on the website right now is a link to the what's now an amended complaint. That's the 2 cases, sort of consolidated, but it's his complaint against them. And then a timeline that was also filed as an exhibit to the complaint, but the timeline is all of like the screenshots of all the text messages and all of that stuff that kind of starts with the author of the It Ends With Us book, who is that, Colleen Hoover. It starts with like her reaching out to him, super excited about this movie, and then it goes through the whole, litany of text messages that he's relying on to show that, he and Blake Lively had basically a fine relationship until they started to have these creative differences, and that, trying to support his position that, none of this had anything to do with any kind of sexual harassment or anything like that.
Yeah, I suspect that part of this is it's obviously like a scorched earth tactic, right? They're trying to, you know, be as loud as they can in their opposition to her claims. I suspect part of it's a PR stunt, sort of, in that who knows how many people are actually going to go to this website and read it, but he can say, "Hey, look, I've got a website. We've got a website that says everything you need to see, everything you need to hear, all the truth is there for you to see, and people will believe that, and they'll just make assumptions based upon the fact that he put it up. But it goes to your point earlier, which is that you know you never know how the other side is going to respond when you file a lawsuit against them, and the scorched earth, bang your head on, bang your hand on the table and make as much noise as possible technique is not uncommon, and you see it a lot with celebrities now. I think of like anytime Dave Portnoy from Barstool got accused of anything, he would sort of take this aggressive kind of scorched earth. I'm going to be all over the place telling you, everyone that will listen, that this is nonsense, and sometimes it works. So it's interesting. Um, Speaking of scorched earth, so the I guess the MO for the Baldoni's attorney is that he is a fiery kind of pit bull type lawyer. And I wasn't even aware of this, but you told me that the court, or excuse me, Blake Lively's team filed a motion to not have Baldoni's attorney take her deposition. Is that right? And the court granted that, which is very unusual.
Yeah, I saw that that they had made that request. I mean, obviously you can understand from her perspective that, if you have this attorney who's really theatrical and whatever, like you might feel that if they were to take your deposition, it's going to turn into a fiasco. I still think, and my understanding is that the judge did grant that. I don't know if that was the judge's compromise. As I think most litigators know, a lot of times judges try to like split the baby when you have uh, disputes, and try to like throw each side a bone. So my sense was that this was potentially, we're going to deny your gag order, but somebody else from this guy's law firm will take your deposition or whatever. I thought that would be, that to me is surprising. And I think it would also go back to just, I don't necessarily, I kind of feel like it's like bad karma to Monday morning quarterback, somebody's lawyer, but I think this does go back to be careful what you wish for and really understand what you're getting into when you get into a lawsuit, because she is the plaintiff. So she made this decision to put herself in this forum. And part of that is that they take your deposition and you say, you allege like severe emotional distress in an employment case, they're allowed to read your medical records with your therapist. I mean, it is so invasive. Like, so you really have to like know what you're getting yourself into. And I mean, I think it would have been perfectly reasonable for a judge to deny that and say this is his attorney and he has the right to depose you. And if he acts like a lunatic in the context of the deposition, then, you have recourse at that point. Then, your lawyer objects or stops the deposition completely and goes to the judge. And then you cross that bridge when you come to it. I mean, lawyers definitely get sanctioned for being abusive and acting inappropriately in depositions, but I've personally never experienced you preemptively cutting the lead attorney out of being able to take the opposing party's deposition.
No, I've been practicing for 20 years. I've done hundreds of depositions, and I've never seen that happen ever. And I've been against very difficult attorneys and depositions. And, to some degree, just to step back so, people listening or watching understand, when you have a lawsuit, part of the pretrial process is that each side gets to ask the other side questions under oath in a deposition, and a court reporter takes down everything that everybody's saying. So there's a transcript afterwards. And I always tell clients when we're preparing, a deposition is not a trial like you see on TV, but it's just as important because what you say in a deposition becomes, in effect, your testimony. And if you say something contradictory at trial, a good attorney will tear it apart and cite the fact that you have different testimony than you had at your deposition. So it's really important. And um, people presumably hire lawyers in part, those who know enough to, because they want them to represent them at important parts of the case, including the deposition. So I've never seen this happen. I've been in depositions where, you know, we've had to walk out. We've had to, have a judge come in and basically babysit the deposition, which judges hate, because the other attorneys were acting so crazy. It's rare, most attorneys, I'd say like 95 or more percent of the time, attorneys are professional, but um, it's very unusual that this would happen. So I don't know if it's this guy's personality or his reputation or the fact that, you know, uh, I don't know. It's interesting. I was very surprised to hear that. It's not at all normal. So
Yeah, and I think I mean, she's in like a pretty tough spot in terms of, what she's kind of gotten herself into, because I would also kind of feel that I wouldn't necessarily want to show my cards at this point and indicate that maybe I was not comfortable having my deposition taken, or that I was nervous about having my deposition taken. And I think that just goes back to sort of knowing what you're getting into, because, like you said, that's a very normal part of the process. And if someone doesn't want to subject themselves to a deposition, they probably should not have bringing the lawsuit in the first place, because you are definitely in the hot seat. And so I don't know that that's like a great way to sort of start things off necessarily. I think, I don't know everything that the other lawyer's been doing, so maybe they were able to paint a compelling picture that he, was going to be abusive or, theatrical or whatever. But definitely something for people to keep in mind, that this is a very normal part of the process, and you have to be willing to stand by your claims and be questioned about them very, aggressively, even if it's respectfully aggressively, like you have to be able to explain yourself.
yeah, I think this is all part of the posturing. I wouldn't be surprised at all if this case settles before depositions. I could be wrong. I think everyone's probably trying to put themselves in a position of strength before there's a negotiation. The longer this goes on, the worse it is for everybody involved in this. And so I wouldn't be surprised if there's a settlement at some point. If it were me and I saw how this was playing out, I would be trying to position the case as strongly as I could to get a case resolved and get everybody to walk away and not have to deal with each other anymore. So we'll
I
see
don't
how
know
it
though.
plays
Like
out.
yeah, I was gonna say we'll see who, the prediction, because I actually feel that it will not settle. And I really feel like this guy is gonna do like a Johnny Depp and like take it like all the way, because in some ways he has nothing to lose unless he can't afford to pay his lawyer, which is also very possible. Um,
No, he's got a big money financial backer. So I don't
oh
think
right,
that's the
doesn't he have
case.
like a billionaire as part of the production company?
Yeah, which
Yeah.
actually maybe
So
you're right. Maybe because of that, you're right.
I see them taking it all away, because I feel like he thinks he's gonna be totally exonerated. I think, even though I think people certainly are and should be protected from retaliation when they make a complaint of sexual harassment. Ultimately, she's not accusing him of like Harvey Weinstein type of behavior. So I think it's going to be easier for people in this case to, excuse me, potentially like excuse what he did and get really wrapped up in like the minutia of this creative process, and do I like you and what did you do? And I would think that he would take it like all the way to have his day in court, which he's entitled to do. Her side is saying like we're going to have our day in court, and when that happens, like then people are going to be on my side. But that's a total coin flip, I think.
Yeah, and maybe I should rephrase and say if I were in her corner, I'd probably be trying to posture this in a way to settle it, and maybe trying to get his attorney removed from the deposition is one of the ways that they're trying to do it. But I don't know. We'll see. I'm sure we'll be revisiting this again as it goes on because people seem to be interested in it, and it's actually from a civil litigation standpoint, it's one of the more interesting cases I've seen in a while.
Yeah, and it's
All
funny
right.
to see kind of how it's reported in the news, because they had like this conference. Sorry. I'm still recovering from my like month-long flu. Um, they had a conference, and like as part of the conference you do a discovery schedule and you set a trial date and stuff like that, and I just thought it was funny just to see sort of how it was reported in the news like as if it was this really significant thing, and then like the trial date, and it was like I had the same exact conference called like a Rule 16 conference in federal court like the same week, and it's like the most basic like preliminary nothing happens like conference that is just starts your case off. So it's just funny that like when it's this kind of thing, everything gets reported like it's a super big deal.
Yeah, that's the misleading headline of the week for sure. Um, all right, so moving on to we have a couple of hip hop artist law related lawsuits that we'll talk about relatively briefly. So um, probably everyone watched the Super Bowl. Most people probably watched Kendrick Lamar's halftime performance. Seemed to be mixed feelings about it. I thought it was good for what it was. Very aggressive on his part. I'm not sure who was paying attention, but there was a point during the performance when Kendrick Lamar kind of was transitioning between songs and stopped and said, "You want me to play it?" or something to that effect. And then he made a comment of, "Well, they like to sue." Uh, Moved on, and then anyway finished the performance with the song "They're Not Like Us," uh, which is about Drake, the hip hop artist. The two have been involved in this big feud forever. They wrote a couple of nasty songs about one another. Kendrick ended the feud with his "Not Like Us" uh, track, which actually won like 5 Grammys recently at the Grammys, including I think Song of the Year and Record of the Year, or Album Record of the Year. In conjunction with that, just prior to the Super Bowl, Drake filed a lawsuit against his own record label, claiming that they artificially inflated or drove traffic to this Kendrick song to try to build it up and make it more popular. Um, I can't imagine why he would do that. This seems like again, a strategy that's probably going to backfire and make him look like he's really grasping. But clearly Kendrick wasn't concerned about it at the Super Bowl because he looked directly in the camera at one point when he mentioned Drake's name. So any thoughts about this one?
Yeah, I mean, just like from a legal perspective, like he's suing the record label. I don't think he's actually suing Kendrick Lamar.
Correct.
You can sue like a publisher of what you allege is a defamatory statement. When somebody goes out and then repeats something false, they can get on the hook for it too, which is a lot of times like how newspapers get sued. Um, but basically the defamation that is alleged is that in the original track of the song, which he did leave this word, even though I think the Super Bowl performance was definitely like a F you in your lawsuit statement, he did not rap the lyric that calls Drake a pedophile, which is what the defamation case is based on. So yeah, I don't know, like that's kind of interesting in terms of how that's gonna, I think there's a little bit of a looser standard when it comes to, musicians and things that are done in a more like quote unquote artistic way. Obviously a pedophile is bad and horrible. That being said, like, is there a little bit of maybe a distinction between calling someone a pedophile and actually accusing them of committing like a specific crime? That's probably like maybe where there might be like some nuance there. Like,
Yeah,
but like President Trump won a pretty substantial settlement from ABC because George Stephanopoulos called him a rapist. That is an accusation of a crime. Now, I think people still thought that the news would have come out on top on that, and under the law of defamation, like that they probably would have prevailed if they had decided to fight that to its bitter end. That being said, being accused, of rape is obviously an accusation of a crime. And in President Trump's case, that was not 100% accurate. Like he is civilly liable for sexual abuse. So if you want to say it very
yeah,
specifically of what is a fact, he was civilly liable of sexual abuse in a civil lawsuit. He is not a, criminally convicted rapist. So I think that could be a distinction that is potentially made in this, that would go in favor of Kendrick Lamar in this situation, kind of like the reverse.
Yeah, both of these situations once again involve uh unpredictable opponents in litigation, right? I think the Trump case is really interesting. Historically, media outlets would never settle these kinds of cases. I think they've run into an opposing party in Trump and his team that are willing to fight in a different way than people have historically fought. They'll fight in the media. They will spend money. They are willing to do things I think that historically opponents in litigation maybe wouldn't do. And because of that, you've seen at least one media outlet caving and settling. And I don't think it's going to be the last. I think it's actually really an interesting dynamic playing out in those cases. So I'm interested to see how they continue to play out. On the
So
Drake
I'm
thing,
actually, oh, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
I was gonna, so as you're, I'm listening to you, but also as you're talking, I did a very quick Westlaw search of pedophile and defamation. So this is what I found from a 2024 case. So this is very recent. This is an employment case. So a supervisor's statements accusing an employee of being a child molester, a pervert, and a pedophile were non-actionable statements of opinion. Even though the words pedophile and child molester were capable of being proven true or false, the word pervert doesn't have a precise meaning capable of being true or false and was subjective in nature. And then it was clear in this case from the context that the supervisor's use of the terms pedophile and child molester were hyperbolic, and he was reacting in anger to the employee's conduct. So I would say that will be Kendrick Lamar's argument in his or the movies or whatever music studio,
Label,
whatever
record
it's
label.
called,
Yeah,
record label.
and who knows if Kendrick Lamar ultimately gets sued. If Drake's smart, he would try to put this to bed and not never think about it again. Because even watching the show, I mean, you know, I think Kendrick really won the day. He had an A minor uh, chain on.
Yeah, I mean,
He had
people love that song. Um,
Yeah, he had Serena Williams dancing, which you pointed out, who is Drake's ex-girlfriend. I mean, it didn't look good. I think Kendrick Lamar, of all the celebrities we talked about this far, is the only one who's winning when it comes to this kind of stuff. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and I think in terms of Drake's lawsuit, and then also, I think this applies to the Blake Lively situation in some ways as well. Like, there's this, I don't know the exact wording of it, but it's called like the Barbara Streisand effect, and it's refers to when you basically sue someone or make a big deal about it. You doing that drew like 8,000 million times more attention to it than it would have had to begin with. Like, I think the Barbara Streisand thing is like somebody flew over her like waterfront property and and then by her taking action on that and not just like letting it lie, it drew like so much more attention to like where she lived and all this stuff. So I think a lot of times, like, if you put your head down and let something pass, everybody's going to forget about it eventually, and then by and again, like the Blake Lively thing, I struggle with because we obviously represent people who call people out for harassment and things like that. So, but I think, hers is probably an example. In the long run, I guess we'll see what happens with her reputation and her movie career. But this potentially caused, more harm for her than good, at least at this point.
Yeah, and your comment about putting your head down and letting something pass is a good segue into our last topic, which is Kanye West. So if you've been living under a rock, Kanye West, actually known as Ye, I think he formally changed his name a few years ago, um, was back in the news again in the last week and a half. First at the Grammys um, when he and his wife showed up at the Grammys, walked the red carpet. His wife took her overcoat off and was wearing a see-through dress. So that was all over the news. And then Kanye or Ye went on a absolutely ridiculous Twitter rant, full of like incredibly anti-Semitic, racist, sexist, disgusting comments. Um, as if that weren't enough, he then made a Super Bowl ad where he directed people to his Yeezy, which is his brand website, and the only thing for sale was a T-shirt with a swastika on it. That has been shut down by Shopify for violating the terms of their user agreements. I think he is officially canceled, which he should be. And frankly, I've said this before, and I talked about it in our newsletter this week. It's what happened with him is actually really sad. I was a huge fan of his music back in the early days. I think he's one of the best. His early albums were like some of the best hip hop in of the generation, and he was an incredible artist. But he just went. I don't know it's mental illness or he's just a horrible human being or some combination of both is probably the case. But in any event, he is probably officially done, I would imagine, because he couldn't just get out of his own way. In association with that, there's now a lawsuit that was just reported by the LA Times, among other outlets, that he is being sued for, guess what it is, being a jerk at work and making anti-Semitic, sexist comments to someone who was working for him. So why don't you fill in the blanks on that one?
Yeah, so one of his former employees is suing him. The employee is Jewish, and she is saying that when she worked for him, he referred to himself as Hitler, made a lot of, anti-Semitic comments. Also, I think there's like some sexist comments in there too. Um, and then she complained and apparently got fired like that day. I mean, this is totally unsurprising. Like people like him, I mean, he's obviously a hateful person. I don't think there's any coming back from what he has done even more recently. I'm sure there's plenty of people who feel like he's been saying this for a really long time and should have been, canceled and had his platform taken away a long time ago. Um, it's a little bit interesting in kind of what's going on in the world at the moment because he has been saying this type of stuff for a long time, and people who have, a very big platform at the moment, did not they kind of allowed him to like campaign for them and maintain a pretty big platform even when he was saying stuff like this. So I think a lot of people are sort of complicit over many years of allowing him to sort of keep his platform. But it does seem like finally he crossed the line. In terms of him acting like this at work in front of his employees, that's like completely unsurprising. So it's a pretty straight, it seems to be a pretty straightforward case. And, in a more maybe not quite as much of a public figure scenario, in just a regular sort of employment context, that could happen, to anyone. It's an example of all of this person's social media will now, it will be the proof that he's like this. And we've actually seen that happen locally, where people maybe got sued for retaliation, or things that happened in the workplace having to do with COVID is what comes to my mind. There were a lot of laws in place, whether you agreed with them or not, about like workplace safety and things that you had to do to keep your employees safe during COVID. And if employees complained about it, they would be protected from retaliation if you weren't, following the law. And we did see people getting sued for violating some of those laws at that time. And guess what was used against them? Their social media stuff saying that, COVID is a hoax and it doesn't exist. And like, I don't even want to get involved in that conversation. Like, if that's what you think, that's fine. I'm not going to fight with you about it. But the bottom line is like, we have laws and we have rules, and you can't retaliate against your employees for complaining about violations of the law.
I would be willing to bet that the plaintiff's lawyer in this case is just salivating to get into discovery and take his deposition because look, you never know until you're in the case, but from the outside, given his history, this looks like a very easy case for a plaintiff and the kind of case that plaintiffs lawyers love because of exactly what you said. There's nothing better than when you have a bad person and you get into a deposition and you just have a litany of history that you can use against this person. And if I were them, I would be doing everything I could to get this thing to a jury trial as fast as possible. Because if you get, unless Kanye West gets the most friendly jury for him in the history of juries, he is going to get tagged big time. And this is in California, where the laws are very favorable to employees, and there are big jury verdicts. And this is a guy who's bragging about how rich he is on social media all the time. And your point is exactly right. People seem to think in many cases that what they say on their private social media is completely separate from whatever they say at work, and that's just not the case anymore. You can't, those lines get blurred, and if you're out there spewing hate all over the internet, that's going to come back at you. And we talk to clients about that, about you really do have to operate in the sense that anything you've said is going to come up against you. And maybe it hurts and maybe it doesn't, but uh you're exactly right. I would not want to be him or his attorney trying to defend this, at this point. And part of it is the lawsuit alleges that she has text messages, and if she's got text messages from him that say I'm Hitler and I'm a not, I mean, give me a
And I mean,
break.
he's saying that stuff publicly, so it's not a big
Yeah,
for someone to just believe it. I mean, when you're a
yeah.
plaintiff in a lawsuit, like your own testimony is evidence, and then it's a credibility determination. And if you're saying he said this stuff to me and he was going around saying it, to everybody, then that's pretty easy for you to get the benefit of credibility. But I would say just, I mean, it's a little bit different because, he's sort of the boss in this situation and his texts are going to be used against him. But I will say, I mean, I think we're trying to not wade into a lot of the discourse that's going on right now, sort of politically. It's like pretty toxic internet environment, social media environment at the moment. But I think it's always a good reminder for people to realize that like your social media is public. Like I really think that people like forget this when they're sitting behind their computer. I mean, I just saw something locally where somebody accused a business of discrimination because they wouldn't put on a political TV show at the bar. So that's like something that we're starting to see here and there, like just with things that we're involved in, like people, want to kind of create like a neutral sort of space or whatever. The comments to like this thing were totally unhinged. And these are like local people under their first and last name, like saying stuff that is super offensive. And even with the Super Bowl, like there was a lot of like, I mean, you don't like Kendrick Lamar's music, fine, but there was a lot of stuff that was very like had a real undertone of racism. And people are just saying this first and last name. And I saw somebody else calling people out and they would call them out by first and last name and then tag their employer. So it's like, you really need to be like, is this worth it? Like, do I need to even enter the conversation? Like, I think a lot of times, like, you don't have to enter the conversation. It's okay. Like, you didn't like the Super Bowl halftime show. It's like tell your husband that you didn't like it. Like, don't you don't have to go on social media and tell the whole universe and then do it in a way where even though you're going to be like, that's not what I meant, where that it's like basically, racist or towing the line of that, like, and then have consequences for it. Like, why ruin your life like that? I think a lot of people they're not like necessarily like horrible human beings, so why put your career at risk or your anything at risk by doing something on, saying something on social media that somebody's going to go report to your boss and you're going to get fired for, because that's allowed. They can do that. Like most employers have social media policy. Don't go and say something stupid that's going to make my business look bad, or people try to boycott my business or leave a bunch of nasty comments on my business website because you acted like, thoughtless. So I
Well,
Kanye is
and
just like
sport.
the number one example of being unable to keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, and for all the folks who cry First Amendment on that, spoiler alert, there's no First Amendment protection for acting like an idiot on social media. You're allowed to say whatever you want. That's the whole point.
Right. If
But
you
to
have a
your to
First
your
Amendment First Amendment right to say what you want without the government throwing you in jail. And your employer has a First Amendment right to say, I don't like what you said, and I think it's stupid, and I think it's a poor reflection of my business, so I'm firing you.
The irony is that nobody cares about any of this. That like nobody cares that John from wherever thought that he couldn't understand what Kendrick Lamar was saying. Nobody cares. That's the irony. It's like God, social media. It's going to be the death of us all. All right. So, anything else before we wrap for today?
No, I think that's it.
All right. So that's going to be it for today. We'll be back again soon. If you like the show, please leave a review. That's 5-star reviews are helpful. Subscribe, like, follow. If you have questions, hit us up on Instagram at TalkLex Podcast. The show is a product of Durazio Peterson PC. If you have legal questions, problems with personal injury, employment matters, give us a call. Thanks for listening. We'll see you soon.